Do you think that Pastor Wendell Anthony, who's also the head of the Detroit chapter of the NAACP, has a hard-on for Donald Trump? Man, I mean, he went after Trump with both feet. Jesus.
Reverend Wendell Anthony, he's the president of the Detroit National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Good to see you, Reverend.
Good morning. Thank you.
All right. So before this event actually took place, you had released a statement. And I just want to read in part some of what you had said. You said, lest we forget this same Donald Trump who would have us to believe that he is seriously concerned about doing something for the African-American voter is the same Trump who led the way for the birther movement against President Barack Obama, questioning his legitimacy as a U.S. citizen. And you say this is the same Donald Trump who refused to come to the NAACP National Convention, held down the street practically from the Republican National Convention, which occurred at almost the same time, citing scheduling conflicts. Please note that Mr. Trump has a private plane, private helicopters, private vehicles, Secret Service, and the police surveillance, so that he has never caught up in any traffic jam. He creates them. He could have easily gotten in and out of the convention in a very timely manner. And then we heard from Donald Trump today at the Great Faith Ministries International Church, who said, I have a lot to learn. And he says he's very much impressed with the gathering of the church there, and he wants to promise prosperity as President of the United States. So, was your view in any way changed based on what you heard from him today compared to your statement before his arrival there in Detroit?
Thank you, Ms. Whitfield. As you know, and part of my statement also reflected the fact that P.T. Barnum, who was one of the great ringling masters of circus performers, said that there's a sucker born every moment because he had various kinds of acts that people flowed to. I'm glad that Mr. Trump did not say 1 John. He did at least say 1 John. This is no more than a ruse. This is a scam. Mr. Trump is 70 years old, I believe. The election now is less than 70 days from now. It's going to take a whole lot of conjecture and a whole lot of planning and program to undo what has already been done. Before you talk about the can-do, let's talk about the undo. Let's undo what Mr. Trump has done. Part of what he said was that we need to unite the country. Well, his policies or lack thereof, his commentary, his rhetoric is doing no more than dividing this nation. When you talk about, I don't want black people counting my money, I would rather have short folk with yarmulkes counting my money, that's divisive.
You stated that in your statement from a book that was written about Donald Trump.
Of course, when you have so many lawsuits relative to the implementation of blacks and brown folk who are trying to get in your housing, that's divisive. If you want to do economic development, let's start with where you are right now. How many black firms have you joint ventured with, Mr. Trump? How many black lawyers, black accountants, black engineers do you have working on Trump Towers? If you come into the city of Detroit on Labor Day, why are you not talking about an increase in the livable wage so that black folk and brown folk and white folk can have a decent living? Your platform as the leader of the Republican Party does not speak to a civil rights agenda. You're talking about civil rights when you are engaged in civil wrongs. To the degree that your party doesn't speak to it, you have never spoken to it, and we don't know who Donald Trump really is. When he leaves Detroit today and goes to another city tomorrow, what is he going to articulate? He was just in Mexico talking one thing and came back to America and talking another thing. Will the real Donald Trump please stand up? Because right now, we don't know who we know. This is tantamount to a wolf coming to the farmhouse asking the sheep to let me lead you to greener pastures, when the pastures that you're going to lead us to have no water, have nothing but weeds and dandelions in them, and do not increase us, but yet they diminish us. So, it's nothing but a ruse, it's nothing but a scam.
So Reverend, you've heard from a number of Trump supporters today, and even as soon as just 10 minutes ago, who say he is vowing to make a difference from this point forward, and perhaps the past isn't enough in which to measure him. What do you say to them?
Well, Frederica, Ms. Whitfield, the Bible says, since he was in the church, by their fruits you shall know them. You cannot determine the nature of a tree by the bark that it wears, but by the fruit that it bears. Donald Trump has borne bad fruit. He's born negative fruit. There are worms in it. And when you eat it, you get sick. And when you go to the hospital, he doesn't even want you to have Obamacare. This is no more than an old Southern strategy wrapped up in a new suit in 2016. It's the same strategy that Lee Atwater and those cats used for Richard Nixon, for Ronald Reagan, and for George Bush. That strategy was devised back in the 70s and the 80s and 60s to talk about, let's use the Southern Dixiecrats, let's use the Southern Democrats who right now are voting Democrat and divide them away from the Democratic Party, and let's use law and order, states' rights. Let's use the language, but not really go there directly. But we can divide them and get their vote by using black people as the target to demonstrate as to why they are suffering economically. And they use that target. Donald Trump has learned this is no more than a page out of that playbook. Lee Atwater would be proud. He would be pleased, because the same message that he gave back then to elect Nixon, to elect Bush, to elect Reagan, is what Donald Trump is using in 2016 in the city of Detroit and around the country. So if we don't know him by now, then we will never, ever, never know him. But we do know you, and what we know is we don't like what we see.
And so Reverend, to African-American voters, some of whom may have been in that congregation, who said they're not necessarily sure, and if it's an issue of trust, they're not necessarily sure if they can trust Hillary Clinton, particularly in light of more revealed from the FBI on, the 47 pages of their note-taking in her 3.5-hour interview, and they're not so sure completely about Donald Trump, but they might measure him based on some of the people that he underscored today who are in his corner. Former Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson, who's from the Detroit area, Omarosa, who you saw right there, in the front row. And he says, that he is surrounded by other prominent African Americans should say something about how genuine he is about the message.
Ms. Whitfield, God bless you. You're such a nice lady, and you do such a good job. And I certainly, as a pastor, recognize when folk come to my church, they're going to be treated nice. They're not going to beat them or boo them. They're going to give them the proper etiquette and protocol. That's what he got at Great Faith Ministries. But when you talk about folk like Ben Carson, Mark Burns, who's just been discredited for filing false information on his bio as a Kappa and as getting a degree. When you talk about Steve Bannon, who is now one of the major campaign directors of the Trump campaign, who said after the 9 folk were killed in Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina, when folk were bringing the Confederate flag down, Steve Bannon through Breitbart News indicated, this is a glorious flag, let the flags be hoisted. This is the guy who helped to lead the way towards birtherism against President Barack Obama. When you look at the record, when you look at what he's saying, when you look at what he is doing, the two don't match up. If you're going to compare, and black people, Frederica, black people, and people misunderstand this, we don't go for the party, we go for the plan. It is the plan, y'all. It is the plan, the focus. Where do you stand on the Voting Rights Act? I'm about retooling it. I want to see who was on your list of 11 candidates that might be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. He gave it to Paul Ryan. He gave it to Mitch McConnell. He gave it to Reince Priebus. Give it to the African-American community. Why didn't you tell us who you were considering for the United States Supreme Court? If you really want to be connected to the African-American community, take the same message of civil rights around to Utah, take it to Iowa, take it to communities down south, and say we need a civil rights agenda to lift up African-Americans and all people. If you're going to say it in Detroit, say it somewhere else. If you don't do it now, then you'll never do it.
He's got under 2 months in which to do it, right? Reverend Wendell Anthony. Thank you so much from Detroit. Appreciate your time. Appreciate it.
Do you think Pastor Anthony is a little upset about Donald Trump? Sure sounds like it.